Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan.
Professor Jiang explains why Trump called off the airstrike on Iran, why President Trump called off the planned strikes on Iran's oil and energy infrastructure at the last minute. While the media framed it as hesitation, humanitarian concern, or political weakness, this script tears that narrative apart and reveals the 5 real strategic and economic calculations that drove the decision. Every reason, from oil price mathematics to Gulf sovereign wealth funds, from China's treasury bond leverage to the nuclear threshold risk, gets translated into a number that lands on a real American household. Gas prices, grocery bills, mortgage rates, retirement accounts.
Let's continue. So, we will know how this war develops just based on geography, okay? So this is a map. And this map, even if you don't really know the war, even if you don't know the participants, even if you don't know the weaponry, this map will tell you exactly how this war will progress. All right, so some certain things to keep in mind about this map. This is what we call this area, okay? Really small, it's 33 kilometers wide, okay? People can swim across it. It's really, really narrow, okay? This small area, guys, it's called the Strait of Hormuz. All right? And it's important because it's really the center of the world. This one area is the nexus, the pivot of the world. Let me explain why. First of all, from the GCC, you have 20% of all the world's oil flowing through this narrow strait. Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan. India depends on 60% of its oil from this area. China depends on 40%. Japan, 75%. Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan has said that, listen, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, we will run out of oil in about 8-9 months. The entire Japanese economy would collapse in 8-9 months if the Strait of Hormuz were to close. And guess what? The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? So we can expect that the entire global economy will suffer greatly over the next few months. All right, so that's point number 1. Point number 2 is, okay, so the GCC sends oil across the Strait of Hormuz, and what do they get back in return? Food, guys. All right, so people don't appreciate the GCC, but it is really the linchpin of the American empire. Because what is the American empire? The American empire is the petrodollar. All right? The idea of the petrodollar is this. The US dollar is worth nothing. It's only valuable if people want it. But the GCC says that if you want oil from us, you have to pay us in US dollars. Okay? Then that is the basis of the value of the US dollar. So, if the GCC collapses, the American economy and the American empire both collapse at the same time. The problem, though, is that GCC is an artificial construct of empire. It does not exist naturally. Why? Because there's no food, there's no oil, no water. Okay, guys? No food, no water. So these cities are able to grow in the millions because of all these petrodollars flowing in. If you close off the Strait of Hormuz, there's no food coming in, right? They're all going to starve. How much food does the GCC get from overseas? 80%. 80% of all the food it consumes comes from overseas, that it imports. It does not grow by itself, it imports. All right? So the Strait of Hormuz is really key. And again, the Iranians will close it in order to strangle the global economy and therefore bankrupt the American empire. All right. Second thing you will notice is these mountains. These mountains is what we call Iran. All right, this is Iran. This is GCC. Okay, this is not a fair matchup, right? Because these are mountains. And what can you do in mountains? Well, you can hide rocket bases. You can hide drone bases. You can hide missiles. And that's the entire Iranian offensive strategy. All right? From here, they can hide missiles and drones from which to attack the GCC. And what are they attacking? They're attacking three things, right? They're attacking American military bases. American military bases. That's number one. Okay? Is it possible for the Americans to defend against these attacks? The answer is no. They're not, it's not. It's the silliest thing in the world. You have all these bases in the Middle East, but you cannot defend them against the Iranians. That's kind of strange. Okay, but that's number one. Number two is oil and energy. How hard is it to blow up an oil field with a drone? Not hard at all. Can you defend these oil fields? No, you cannot. All right? Number three, and this is most important, is water. Okay? You guys don't know this, but the GCC has little access to fresh water. So the only way that it can produce water is what we call desalination plants, okay? These factories that take salt water and then through an electrochemical process turn it into fresh water for the population to use. 60% of the water supply in the GCC comes from desalination plants, okay? 60%. Is it hard to blow up a desalination plant using a drone? The answer is, it's very easy. You understand? Okay? So you have this absurd situation where Iran is a mountain fortress where it can hide its offensive capacity, and the GCC, it's just this desert, this flat desert, and it is exposed to attack, and there's nothing it can do about it. Okay? So at any point in this war, the Iranians can choose to just destroy the entire GCC, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it. Okay? But Iran also has a weakness, okay? And this is fundamental. So Iran also has a water problem, okay? So for the longest time, they suffered a drought issue. Okay, just climate change. And so what the plan of the Israelis and Americans is destroy the water supply of the Iranians. Because the fortress, it is a mountain fortress, but it can also be a mountain prison as well, where people are trapped inside with no access to water. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, we're already seeing attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals. In the future, you'll see attacks on water supply, on dams, on reservoirs, on power plants. The idea is to make Iran so inhabitable that the people will have to rebel against the people, or there'll be a refugee crisis in Iran. Okay? So as you can see from this map, this war, it is the end of the world. Okay? Both sides have the potential to destroy each other. And it's really a question of how far do they want to go. All right? We can also say this is almost a game of chicken. Okay? We can blow each other up. How far do you want to go? And the problem is this. The problem is that the Iranians are Shia, which believes in martyrdom. And you've killed the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So they're willing to go very, very far. The GCC countries are Muslim, but they're materialistic. They love money. And also, most of the population are expatriates, foreigners. 90% of Dubai are foreigners. Guess what's going to happen if they suffer? They're all going to run away. Okay? So this is not a fair matchup. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we will look at in the next few weeks. Will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers to topple the government? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two nuclear weapons. If you're losing a war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Now, another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III, okay? Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're going to use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. Okay? All right. You guys understand? All right. All right. Let's continue.
The stuff about the Strait of Hormuz is real and worth taking seriously. The dependency numbers for Japan, China, and India on Gulf oil are roughly in the ballpark of what serious energy analysts cite. Japan really is extraordinarily vulnerable to any disruption in that waterway. And that's not some fringe observation. It's been a cornerstone of East Asian security policy for decades. Similarly, the point about desalination infrastructure being fragile and difficult to defend is a legitimate concern that think tanks and military planners have written about extensively. The GCC really does import a staggering amount of its food. These are not invented facts. They're real structural vulnerabilities that make the region uniquely fragile in ways that most casual observers don't appreciate. So, credit where it's due. The geographic framing at the start is genuinely interesting and educational. The cost asymmetry argument between cheap Iranian drones and expensive American interceptor missiles is also a real documented problem. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. The Pentagon has literally published reports acknowledging that shooting down a $50,000 drone with a $1 million missile is economically unsustainable at scale. The Russia-Ukraine war made this problem impossible to ignore. So again, there's a kernel of serious analysis in here that deserves acknowledgement. But here's where it starts falling apart. The script takes these legitimate observations and then extrapolates wildly from them in ways that aren't really supported. Saying the entire American military is fundamentally corrupt and essentially useless is just not a serious analytical position. Yes, there is waste in defense procurement. That's been true since the Cold War, and both parties in America have failed to address it meaningfully. Yes, the drone cost asymmetry is a genuine strategic problem. But jumping from those real issues to the whole military doesn't do anything and is just about spending money ignores an enormous amount of contradicting evidence. American air power, logistics, and intelligence capabilities have genuinely shaped outcomes in conflicts repeatedly. The military has real problems, but it's not a paper tiger across the board, and treating it like one is its own kind of bias. The framing around Iranian invincibility is also overdone. The script basically presents Iran as this mountain fortress that can destroy everything around it at will while being nearly impossible to harm in return. But Iran has its own very serious structural weaknesses beyond just water, which the script does eventually get to, but then undersells. Their economy has been genuinely devastated by decades of sanctions. Their conventional military is outdated. Their internal political situation is more fragile than the script lets on. The 2022 protests were not a minor thing. Presenting them as this cohesive, unstoppable force ready for total war glosses over a lot of real internal contradictions. The ethnic fragmentation section is where the script gets the most problematic, honestly. It presents what is essentially a speculative theory about American and Israeli long term strategic intent as if it were established, confirmed fact. Look, you can absolutely make a reasonable argument that external powers have historically exploited ethnic tensions in the Middle East. That's documented history going back to the British Mandate period. But the specific map being shown and the specific plan being described, breaking Iran into ethnic enclaves and having them fight over water forever, that's being stated with a confidence that the evidence doesn't support. It might be true. It might be partially true. It might be a real discussion happening in certain policy circles. But presenting it as the plan, as if someone leaked the memo, is intellectually dishonest. The speaker is conflating what makes strategic sense on a game theory board with what is actually being decided in real rooms by real people. There's also this weird undercurrent of romanticization running through the whole thing that should make you uncomfortable regardless of your politics. The Iranians are described as spiritually committed, willing to die for their beliefs, cohesive, energized by poverty. The GCC populations are basically dismissed as shallow, materialistic foreigners who will flee at the first sign of trouble. That's not analysis, that's stereotype. Plenty of people in the GCC have deep roots there and would not simply abandon their homes. And plenty of Iranians, as the script itself briefly acknowledges, are not enthusiastic supporters of the current government and its military adventurism. The caricature of both populations serves the narrative, but it doesn't serve the truth. The biggest methodological problem throughout is the tone of absolute certainty. The speaker keeps saying things like, "This map will tell you exactly how this war will progress," or "Iran can destroy the GCC at any point and there's nothing anyone can do about it." This kind of language sounds authoritative, but it's actually a red flag. Anyone who has seriously studied military history knows that wars almost never follow the logical script that pre war analysis predicts. Geography matters enormously, yes, but so does leadership, morale, miscalculation, third party intervention, technology surprises, domestic political pressures, and just plain luck. The confidence here is performing expertise rather than demonstrating it. And then the World War III framing at the end. Europe getting involved, Russia and China entering on Iran's side. This is presented very casually, as if it's a natural, logical progression, when in reality, it would require an extraordinary series of decisions by multiple independent actors, each of whom has massive incentives not to escalate to that level. China, in particular, has enormous economic interests in stability and has been notably cautious about being drawn into direct confrontation. Treating their involvement as almost inevitable is not serious geopolitical analysis. So, where does that leave you with this script overall? It's the kind of content that's genuinely dangerous in a specific way, not because it's entirely wrong, but because it mixes legitimate insight with motivated reasoning so smoothly that it's hard for a casual viewer to separate them. The geographic stuff is real. The economic vulnerabilities are real. The drone cost asymmetry is real. But those real things are being used to build a framework that is much more ideologically loaded than it pretends to be. The speaker has a clear perspective on who the bad guys are, and the analysis is being shaped around that conclusion rather than the other way around. That doesn't make every claim wrong, but it should make you hold all of it at arm's length and go verify things independently before you walk away thinking you now understand exactly how this conflict will unfold.